It's our last day in the west of England. Tomorrow we drive home. In the previous episode, we visited Eastnor Castle, a place that despite all its battlements and suits of armour, is closer in time to Justin Bieber than Richard III.
It is actually relatively modern. My dad asked one of the people inside and they said it was actually built in 1812, so despite its imposing appearance, it's doubtful that it was ever used in any sort of military combat.
But today we're headed to Worcester, the town where the British monarchy was, for the first and only time in its history, destroyed.
So, it did rain and thunder a great deal last night, and now I'm in the very unusual and strange position of being able to walk around without a fan on me. So it's weird to actually be able to walk around without sweat cascading out of every pore. But today we can, and we're going off to Worcester.
The rain that came as a mercy after such oppressive heat has outstayed its welcome, lasting through the night and into today. Now I find myself underdressed for the soggy streets, and a trip to Primark is required.
Becky says to me today, "Don't worry about your coat, you won't need it." Well, wouldn't you know it, the first time this week it is truly bucketing it down during the day. So, got to get something to keep the rain off, right? I've already explained to the camera how you said I wouldn't need a coat.
I didn't say that.
How'd I look?
Handsome as always.
Ain't that the truth? Now lend me your ears while I explain why Worcester is a terrible place to be called Charles.
So, Worcester is home to many fine things. It's home to the classical composer, Edward Elgar. It's home to Worcestershire porcelain. It's home to the world's oldest newspaper, so claimed, the Worcester Journal. And it's also home to Lee and Perrin's Worcestershire sauce, which you can hear being mispronounced all over YouTube by American chefs and bartenders. Well, the part of its history that interests me the most is its role in the English Civil War. Now, I know I spoke a little bit about the English Civil War in my previous video about Ledbury, and you can check that out, but just to refresh, for those of you who don't know, the war was fought by Charles I. Now, Charles I thought he ought to be able to reign as king undisputed. He didn't want Parliament interfering in his affairs, and Parliament wanted to rein him in. The last thing they wanted to be dealing with was another tyrannical king. And of course, this ended up leading to war. Now, Charles I tended to use this part of the country as his base of operations because there was a lot of loyalty to the royal family in this part of the country. Well, eventually Charles I was defeated and he was imprisoned on the Isle of Wight and later executed. Now, the Parliament of Scotland, which was loyal to the royal family, moved to recognise Charles I's heir, Charles II, as king. Now, Charles II rallied a force of loyal Scotsmen and brought them down here to Worcester, and he prepared to take the fight to Oliver Cromwell and the parliamentarians and their new model army. Now, Charles II was very much outmatched. He had about 16,000 men, and he was going up against a force 28,000 strong, and he fought them right here in the streets of Worcester and lost. And that is how England became, for the first and only time in its history, a republic.
Just around the corner, the King's old battle headquarters is still standing.
So this building behind me is the Commandery, and it's here that Charles II, during the Battle of Worcester, would have had his headquarters. And from here he could easily get to the cathedral, where he would have had a lookout over the city. From up high in the cathedral, he could see, as the battle unfolded, that actually there was an opportunity to make an attack on Parliament's forces. So he seized the mantle and launched an attack, and for a good hour or so he was able to drive back the forces of Oliver Cromwell and the new model army. But eventually sheer numbers overwhelmed them, and when Parliament turned the tables on him and they started driving them back towards the city, it became a rout and the royalists were completely defeated. But Charles II was able to escape the city. A last desperate cavalry charge was mounted, and they charged up this road here and up the high street, and eventually escaped from the city via St Martin's Gate, where I believe there is now an Asda. Of course, that began the English interregnum, when Oliver Cromwell reigned as dictator over all of England. Eventually, however, he died, and in the struggle to succeed him, they invited Charles II back, and he reigned as King of England.
Then we wander over to the grand old cathedral. I take a quick look inside, but since they charge you for photography, and I've got better places to spend my money than church, You'll just have to imagine the inside of every other cathedral you've ever been in.
So one thing I noticed about that cathedral is that actually you've still got all the saints there around the archway. And of course, at Tewkesbury the other day, a lot of the figurines have been ripped out, and that would have been from when England became Protestant under King Henry VIII. And I wondered why it was that they still had the figures of the saints here. Well, the guy at the door told me it's because they were Victorian replacements. So, not actually that old after all.
Well, that's Worcester, a fine city for dethroning people. Now we're headed to Ledbury, where we've got afternoon tea booked at the historic Feathers Hotel.
Where have you been?
It's like a garden centre type full of gardens, so it's quite a good to walk around.
Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, or afternoon as it is now.
That was a question.
Did you have a good morning?
Oh, did I have a good morning? Oh, yes.
So we are back in Ledbury for afternoon tea here at the Feathers Hotel, and that's going to be our sort of dinner today, I suppose. Okay, we are all done at the Feathers, where we have had a lovely afternoon tea, evening tea really, but we were given some beef sandwiches when a lot of my family don't have beef, and even though they didn't have the chefs in-house at the moment, one of the other staff went out back and made a nice fresh batch of salmon sandwiches and cheese and tomato, which was lovely, and loads of them too, so it was a bargain. $22.50 in total it was for me and Becky. I'm not sure if that's a normal price. I think they knocked a little bit off. But yeah, very pleased.
An exciting evening of packing awaits, so that's all for another day. We drive back to Malvern to get started ahead of the drive home tomorrow.
Yeah, I think so. Just packing the last bag as we speak, and then we can be on our merry way. Okay, and we are away. Farewell to our little holiday home in Malvern Hills. It's been lovely. And now the big journey home begins.
Well, that's it for the Malvern series. I'm conscious of the fact that there are many travels filmed before the pandemic I've yet to edit together, so I'm going to take some time now to work on those. The footage will be pretty basic in comparison, but the trips themselves were every bit as good. So, like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's next.